The distant howl of a coyote broke the stillness as Faith Lancaster stood shivering on the doorstep of a stranger's cabin. Her 3 young daughters huddled against her skirts, while the early winter wind whipped mercilessly through the Wyoming Territory wilderness of 1873. She had nowhere else to turn, her husband having cast her out just days before, declaring her useless for bearing him nothing but daughters when he needed sons to work his struggling ranch. Faith raised a trembling hand to knock, praying whoever lived here wouldn't turn away a desperate mother and her children. The journey from her former home had been harrowing, traveling on foot through unforgiving terrain with Abigail, aged 7, Mary, aged 5, and little Alina, only 3 years old. They had slept in abandoned shacks and under the stars, their meager possessions bundled in a single satchel. The cabin door swung open before her knuckles could make contact with the weathered wood, revealing a tall man with eyes the color of the summer sky. His sandy hair fell in untamed waves beneath a well-worn Stetson, and a week's worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, but his expression wasn't threatening, just cautious. "Madam," he questioned, his gaze moving from Faith to the 3 small girls who clung to her like little burrs. "Please, sir," Faith began, her voice cracking from thirst and exhaustion. "My girls and I need shelter for the night. We can't travel any farther today." The man's eyes softened as he took in their bedraggled appearance. "Name's Wade Barnes," he said, stepping back from the doorway. "Come in before you all freeze to death." Relief coursed through Faith's veins as she ushered her daughters inside. The cabin was modest but meticulously kept, with a fire blazing in the hearth that promised blessed warmth. A pot of something savory bubbled over the flames, making Faith's empty stomach clench painfully. "Thank you, Mr. Barnes," she whispered, fighting back tears of gratitude. "I'm Faith Lancaster. These are my daughters Abigail, Mary, and Alina." Wade nodded at each girl in turn, his expression gentle. "Pleased to meet you, ladies. I've got stew almost ready. Looks like you could all use a hot meal." While Wade ladled hearty venison stew into wooden bowls, Faith settled her exhausted daughters at the rough-hewn table. The girls were uncharacteristically quiet, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. Wade's cabin was sturdy and practical. A large main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with 2 doors leading presumably to bedrooms. Furs and woven blankets adorned the walls and floor, lending warmth to the rustic interior. "Been out here about 5 years now," Wade explained as he placed the steaming bowls before them. "Raised cattle at first, but wolves were bad that season. Switched to hunting and trapping, some trading with the Shoshone. Do well enough for myself." Faith nodded, watching her daughters devour the stew with the desperate hunger of children who hadn't eaten properly in days. She took a small bite of her own, nearly moaning at the rich flavor. "This is delicious." Wade's weathered face creased in a smile. "Not much for fancy cooking, but a man learns to feed himself out here, or he doesn't last long." As the meal progressed, little Alina began to droop in her seat, her golden curls falling forward into her half-finished bowl. Faith moved to gather her up, but Wade was faster. "Allow me, madam," he said, gently lifting the tiny girl into his arms. She nestled against his broad chest without protest, already more than half asleep. "Second door, there's my spare room. Got a decent bed. You and the girls can take it tonight." Faith's throat tightened. "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Wade interrupted firmly. "I've slept on worse than my own floor plenty of times. Come morning, we'll figure things out." That night, lying in a stranger's bed with her daughters curled against her like kittens, Faith listened to the wind howl outside and contemplated how drastically her life had changed. Just a week ago, she'd been the wife of Harold Lancaster, living on his ranch near Laramie. It hadn't been a love match. She'd married at 18 when her family could no longer afford to feed her, but she'd been a dutiful wife for 8 years. Harold had been disappointed with each daughter born, his resentment growing alongside his mounting debts. When Alina was born, 2 years passed and proved to be yet another girl. He'd barely looked at the infant. But Faith never imagined he would cast them all out, until the bank threatened foreclosure and Harold decided his only hope was to start fresh elsewhere without the burden of a wife who could only produce useless daughters. "Take what you can carry and go," he'd told her coldly. "I'm heading to California. Got no room for 4 females eating my profits and doing nothing for my future." Faith closed her eyes against the memory, focusing instead on the sound of her daughter's soft breathing and the occasional creak of floorboards as Wade moved about in the main room. She wondered what would happen when morning came. Wade Barnes hadn't expected company that evening, certainly not in the form of 4 bedraggled females appearing like ghosts through the swirling snow. But something in Faith Lancaster's determined stance, despite her obvious exhaustion, had stirred something within him. No mother and her babes should be wandering the wilderness as winter descended upon Wyoming Territory. He stretched out on the bearskin rug before the fire, hands laced behind his head, and listened to the occasional soft sounds coming from the spare room. It had been a long while since his cabin had housed anyone but himself, not since his brother had visited 2 summers past. The quiet solitude suited Wade most days, allowing him to escape memories of the war that still haunted his dreams. But tonight, the knowledge that others slept under his roof brought an unexpected comfort. Morning arrived with a pale sun struggling through heavy clouds. Wade had coffee brewing and biscuits baking when Faith emerged from the bedroom, her copper hair hastily pinned up, and her simple dress smoothed as best she could manage. The circles beneath her eyes spoke of poor sleep, despite the comfortable bed. "Good morning, Mr. Barnes," she said softly, glancing back at the still sleeping children. "I hope we didn't disturb your rest." "Wade," he corrected. "And no, madam, slept just fine." "Coffee," Faith accepted the steaming cup gratefully, warming her slender fingers around it. After a hesitant sip, she looked up at him with clear green eyes. "I must impose upon your kindness for direction to the nearest town. We'll be on our way as soon as the girls wake." Wade frowned, glancing toward the window. "Storm's picking up again." "Nearest town's Riverton, and that's a good 20 miles east." "Oh," Faith's shoulders slumped slightly. "Perhaps just point us in the right direction and you planning to carry all 3 girls through snow drifts?" Wade interrupted, his voice gentle despite the blunt words. "Because that's what you'd be facing by noon." "Aye." Faith faltered, tears welling in her eyes before she blinked them stubbornly away. "We can't stay here indefinitely, Mr. Barnes. It wouldn't be proper," Wade snorted. "Proper doesn't mean much when survival's at stake, madam. You and your girls need shelter through this weather, and I've got room. Simple as that." "Nothing's ever that simple," Faith murmured, but she didn't argue further. As the biscuits finished baking, little voices drifted from the bedroom. Soon all 3 girls were seated at the table, regarding Wade with a mixture of curiosity and shyness as they nibbled on biscuits smeared with wild honey. "Mr. Wade has a dog," Mary announced suddenly, pointing toward the corner where Wade's old hound Moses lay watching the proceedings with mild interest. "That's Moses," Wade confirmed. "He's partial to children, especially ones who scratch behind his ears." This revelation caused great excitement among the Lancaster girls. Even Alina, who had yet to speak a word in Wade's presence, slipped from her chair to approach Moses with cautious fascination. Faith watched her daughters with a mixture of joy and apprehension. They've never had pets. "Harold, my husband, didn't approve of animals in the house." Wade noted how she twisted the plain gold band on her finger as she spoke. "Your husband let you leave with the children?" he asked carefully. Faith's expression hardened momentarily. "He insisted upon it. Said he had no use for daughters who couldn't work the land like sons. He's gone to California now to try his luck in the gold fields." Anger flared in Wade's chest, hot and unexpected. What kind of man abandoned his family because his children were girls? He'd known men like that during the war, men who valued others only for their usefulness. "His loss," Wade said simply. watching Alina giggle as Moses gently licked her small hand. The storm intensified throughout the day, bringing howling winds that rattled the cabin's sturdy walls and snow that piled steadily against the windows. Wade kept the fire well fed and showed the older girls how to play checkers with carved wooden pieces. Faith insisted on helping with dinner preparation, demonstrating a deft hand with the limited supplies available. "You cook better than I do," Wade admitted as they shared a meal of rabbit stew and cornbread. Faith smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her weary face. "I enjoy cooking." It was one of the few things Harold complimented. "Seems your Harold was blind to a great many virtues," Wade observed, immediately regretting the familiarity when Faith's cheeks colored. "He worked hard," she defended automatically, then sighed. "But he was not a kind man. I thought having children would soften him, but each daughter only hardened his heart further." Wade watched Abigail helping her youngest sister drink from a cup too big for her tiny hands. "These girls are treasures. Any fool can see that." That evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Faith and Wade sat before the fire sharing a pot of coffee. The domesticity of the scene struck Wade as both foreign and strangely right. "Tell me about yourself, Wade Barnes," Faith requested softly, her guard lowering slightly in the firelight's warmth. Wade contemplated the dancing flames. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Missouri, fought for the Union, came west afterward looking for peace and quiet. Did you find it?" "Most days," he smiled slightly. "Though I admit it's been less quiet since yesterday." Faith laughed softly, the sound surprising them both. "I apologize for the disruption." "Don't," Wade said seriously. "It's a welcome change." 3 days passed with the storm showing no signs of abating. The forced confinement could have been awkward, but instead, a comfortable routine emerged. Wade taught the girls to whittle simple animals from soft pine, delighting in their concentration and pride in their creations. Faith reorganized his meager pantry and mended clothing that had been awaiting attention for months. In the evenings, after the children slept, Wade and Faith talked. He learned about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west with parents who died of fever before seeing her settled. She discovered his love of poetry, surprising for a man who spent most of his time tracking and hunting. He shared volumes of Wordsworth and Whitman that had traveled with him from battlefields to wilderness. "I never expected to find books like these here," Faith admitted, running her fingers reverently over the worn leather bindings. "A man needs beauty even in harsh places," Wade replied. "Maybe especially then." On the 4th morning, Wade rose early and slipped out to check his traps, returning with a brace of rabbits and the news that the snow had finally stopped. The sun sparkled brilliantly on the pristine white landscape surrounding the cabin. "The pass to Riverton will be clear in another day or two," he informed Faith as he shrugged out of his snow-dusted coat, Faith's hands stilled in the middle of kneading dough. "Oh," she said softly, "that's good news." Wade hung his coat by the door, not looking at her. "Unless you'd consider staying." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Faith turned slowly to face him, flour dusting her hands and a strand of copper hair escaping its pins to curl against her cheek. "Staying," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "This cabin's bigger than I need," Wade continued, emboldened by the lack of immediate refusal. "Got good hunting grounds, space for a proper garden come spring. Girls could use the fresh air, freedom to run, and I could use—" He hesitated, then finished honestly, "I could use the company." Faith's eyes widened. "Mr. Barnes, are you proposing an arrangement?" "I'm proposing you all stay," Wade clarified. "No strings attached. If you want to move on come better weather, I'd understand, but you're welcome here for as long as you wish." Faith studied him intently, searching for hidden motives. Finding none, she slowly nodded. "That's very generous. We'll stay until spring at least if you're certain." Wade felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The prospect of the cabin returning to its former silence had been increasingly distressing. "I'm certain." As winter settled in earnest across the Wyoming wilderness, the unlikely household adjusted to their new reality. Wade built a second bed for the girls, positioning it opposite the existing one in the spare room to give Faith some privacy. He taught Abigail to set simple snares for rabbits, delighting in her quick understanding and serious dedication to the task. Mary proved to have a natural affinity for Moses, who followed her everywhere and slept at the foot of the girl's bed each night. Even little Eleanor began to come out of her shell, trailing after Wade and chattering about the pictures she saw in the clouds or the patterns of frost on the windows. Faith blossomed too, the constant worry lines between her brows gradually smoothing as she realized Wade truly welcomed their presence. She expanded their simple meals with creative use of preserved goods from his root cellar, and began fashioning new clothing for the girls from fabric Wade traded for with passing trappers. Christmas approached, bringing with it an air of anticipation to the cabin. Wade ventured deeper into the forest one morning and returned dragging a small pine tree which he set up in the corner of the main room. Never had cause for a Christmas tree before, he admitted as the girls danced around in excitement. Figured this year was different. Faith watched him secure the tree in a bucket of sand, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite name. "The girls have never had one either," she said. "Harold thought they were frivolous." Wade straightened, brushing pine needles from his hands. "Well, now they can have the biggest one that'll fit through the door." In the days that followed, Faith and the girls crafted simple ornaments from pine cones, dried berries, and scraps of colorful fabric. Wade disappeared into his workshop, a small lean-to attached to the barn, for hours each day, emerging with sawdust in his hair but refusing to reveal what he was making. On Christmas Eve, after a special dinner of venison roast and wild berry preserves, Wade presented each girl with a hand-carved toy, a rocking horse for Abigail, a doll for Mary, and a pull-along duck for Eleanor. Their squeals of delight filled the cabin as they explored their treasures. Later, when the children were asleep, Faith joined Wade by the fire. "You didn't need to do all this," she said softly. "Wanted to," Wade replied simply. He reached beneath his chair and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you. It's not much." Faith unwrapped the gift with trembling fingers, revealing a beautifully carved wooden box with wildflowers etched into its lid. When she opened it, a sweet melody played, a music box mechanism Wade had traded valuable furs to obtain from a passing peddler. "It's beautiful," Faith whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "So are you," Wade said quietly, the words escaping before he could reconsider them. Faith's gaze flew to his face, her cheeks flushing. For a moment neither spoke, the only sound the crackling fire and the gentle notes of the music box. "I have nothing to give you," Faith finally said, closing the box carefully. Wade reached out, his calloused fingers brushing lightly against hers. "You've given this place life again." "That's more than enough." Their first kiss was tentative, questioning a new beginning fraught with both promise and uncertainty. When they parted, Faith's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if memorizing the sensation. "I'm still married," she whispered, the gold band on her finger suddenly heavy. "In name only," Wade pointed out gently. "He cast you aside, Faith, left you to fend for yourself and those precious girls in wilderness territory." Faith nodded slowly. "I know. But before anything more happens between us, I need to resolve that part of my past, for the girls' sake and for ours." "I respect that," Wade assured her, though it took considerable restraint not to pull her back into his arms. "And I'll wait as long as it takes." Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and new growth. The narrow game trails widened into proper paths again, and Wade began making regular trips to Riverton for supplies. On one such journey in early April, he carried with him a letter Faith had written to a lawyer, inquiring about the possibility of divorce given Harold's abandonment. The girls thrived in the warmer weather, exploring the meadows surrounding the cabin and helping Faith plant the vegetable garden she had planned meticulously through the winter months. Wade expanded the chicken coop he'd built years earlier, but never fully utilized, and 6 hens now provided fresh eggs daily. News came slowly to their remote home, but by late May, Wade returned from town with information that Harold Lancaster had indeed made it to California and had died in a mining accident the previous autumn. Faith received this news with complicated emotions, relief mingled with a strange grief for what might have been had Harold been a different sort of man. The girls never truly knew their father. She confided to Wade that evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance above the new grass. He had little time for them, and what attention he did give wasn't kind. "They deserve better," Wade said simply. Faith turned to study his profile in the fading light. "They've found better in you, Wade. You've shown them more patience and love in these months than Harold did in their entire lives." Wade's heart constricted at her words. These past months had transformed his solitary existence into something rich and meaningful. The cabin no longer felt like merely a shelter, but a home filled with laughter and purpose. "I love them," he admitted quietly. "All of you." Faith's hand found his in the gathering darkness. "And we love you." 2 weeks later, Reverend Thomas from the small church in Riverton rode out to perform a simple wedding ceremony beneath the towering pine trees beside the cabin. Abigail and Mary scattered wildflower petals while Alina toddled behind them, clutching Mose's collar for support. Faith wore a dress of soft blue calico that she'd sewn secretly in the evenings, her copper hair crowned with a wreath of daisies the girls had gathered that morning. Wade, clean-shaven and dressed in his best shirt, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him through the dappled sunlight. "Never thought I'd have this," he whispered as she reached his side. "Nor I," Faith replied, her smile radiant. "A second chance." The vows were traditional, but spoken with profound meaning by two people who had found each other against all odds. When Wade kissed his bride, the girls cheered and Moses howled his approval, causing everyone to laugh. That evening, after a celebration feast attended by their few neighbors from miles around, Wade and Faith stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. "When I first came to your door," Faith mused, "I only hoped for shelter for a night." Wade pulled her close, breathing in the scent of wildflowers in her hair. "And I only thought to offer temporary refuge, never imagined you'd steal my heart so completely." "We rescued each other, I think," Faith said, turning in his arms to face him. "You gave us a home when we had none, and we gave you a family when you thought you'd always be alone." Inside, the girls slept peacefully in their room, which would soon need expansion. Wade had decided, especially with the whispered news Faith had shared with him just that morning about a new addition expected by winter. He had already begun planning the cradle he would carve, wondering if this time it might be needed for a son. But looking at Faith's beloved face in the moonlight, Wade realized it didn't matter. Boy or girl, any child born of their love would be cherished. Harold Lancaster had cast aside a treasure beyond measure when he declared daughters worthless. Wade Barnes knew that the greatest fortune a man could possess was the love of those who called him family. "Come inside, Mrs. Barnes," he said softly, taking his wife's hand. "Tomorrow's a new day." Faith squeezed his fingers. Her wedding band, newly crafted from gold Wade, had panned from the creek that ran through their property, catching the starlight. "A new day in a lifetime of them," she agreed. Together they entered the warmth of their cabin, closing the door on the wilderness outside and embracing the future they had built from the broken pieces of Faith's past and the solitary existence Wade had once accepted as his fate. In finding each other, they had created something neither had dared to dream possible, a love as vast as the Wyoming sky and as enduring as the mountains that sheltered their home. Years would pass, bringing more children, both daughters and sons, to the Barnes homestead. The cabin would expand into a proper house, surrounded by gardens and grazing cattle. Faith's daughters would grow into strong, capable women who remembered little of the desperate journey that had brought them to Wade's door that snowy night. But Wade and Faith never forgot how the simple act of opening a door to strangers had changed everything. How love had found them in the most unexpected circumstances, and how a man who had sought solitude had discovered that his true peace lay in the hearts of a woman and three little girls who needed nothing more than to be valued for exactly who they were.